Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everybody. My name is Vittorio Emanuele Parsi. I'm professor of international relations and director at Zeri, the graduate school of economics and international relations of the Università Cattolica del Sacro Cuore in Italy, in Milan. And it's a pleasure, an honor, and a privilege to be here with you and sharing this space with Caroline Gombe. We will take a conversation on Black Lives Matter and Black Women's March, origins and outcomes of a movement within the Progetto Genesi, Arte and Human Rights. And Caroline Gombe is the main speaker, of course. She is the founder of the Black Women's March. Just a short bio of Caroline. She's an actress, she's an acting teacher, and an activist and an organizer who lives in New York City. While observing the protests in New York that followed the murder of George Floyd, soon after they began, she noticed that there were many Black women leading the movement. There was also the need to create a suitable representation for the issue of Black women. She too understood the urgent need to create a group that specifically focused on Black women and decided to organize it beginning with a protest march. The Black Women's March conducted its first official action on June 22, 2020 at the Herbert von King Park in Brooklyn, New York. Since then, members of the community, politicians, the press, artists allies, men and women, and many other Black Lives Matter organizations have approached Gombe and the Black Women's March, carrying out a great number of actions in support of the New York community, but also outside the city, like in Washington, DC, Minneapolis, and in all the New Jersey. So, Caroline, thank you for coming. Thank you for give us your precious time, and we are here to listen to you. Welcome, and please take the room. Take the floor.
Hi, everybody. Thank you so very much for having me here. It's an honor to have the opportunity of talking about Black Lives Matter and Black Women's March. It's also a pleasure to be in this webinar, and I'm going to start talking about this specific thing first. This offer to be in this webinar was sent to Black Women's March to me in March 2021, yeah. So at the moment I received the email and the invitation, to me it was surreal. I couldn't think that far in terms of, where the movement was then what was I doing at that moment. And what's important to remember connected with that is the fact that I said yes to this invitation gave me something, a perspective. I knew that I have to do something in a year from now with Black Women's March. So I'm going to be honest, there were moments in this year almost that this specific invitation kept me going. And I'm talking about that because I want all of you to understand how important it is to do anything. Absolutely anything, an invitation to share a post, to whatever you do, it is important in this movement. It is important for Black people everywhere. So that being said, let's start the conversation with Black Lives Matter. What is it and when did it start? How did it go and where are we now? Black Lives Matter started in 2012 and it's so not, I think not random, the fact that we talk about this today, because 2 days ago, we had a very dark anniversary, the death of Trayvon Martin. The death of Trayvon Martin happened in 2012, and it's the reason the hashtag Black Lives Matter was created. The hashtag was created by Alicia Garza, who's one of the founders of the movement. Now, in 2012, after the murder of Trayvon Martin, she started this hashtag, and it's important to remember that it's 2012. It's the moment that social media started being a really big part of our life. So because of that, connected with everything that happened, that hashtag kept going. Not as big as it would have become like this year, but it started a sort of a community, gathering a sort of community around it. Now in 2013, after the acquittal of George Zimmerman, the killer of Trayvon Martin, Alicia Garza and two other Black women, Patrice Cullors, and I just have to check my Opal Tameti, I have it in my house. I'm very bad with names. So these three Black women started a movement, the movement Black Lives Matter. In my opinion, Black Lives Matter is the modern chapter of the civil rights movement. Now, from 2012, the hashtag, and 2013, the movement, the beginning of Black Lives Matter as a movement, until 2020, there were many, many things that happened. Many lives lost, many Black lives lost, and not just lost. Many activists arrested, many Black people protesting who have been going through a lot of problems since then. But also, because of the creation of this movement, a lot of groups started working as a group or as an organization back then. Now, all these groups, they did not stop working until 2020. There was a constant work because the work that Black activists do is not necessarily what you see on Instagram. There are a lot of cases that nobody sees, but because the movement grew, the community felt more inclined to reach out to these groups. Now, a very important moment in the time between Black Lives Matter was created and 2020 is Sandra Bland, which happened in 2015. There were protests in New York and around the country, and that solidified the movement, if you want. Also brought in Black women. And now we're going to go to the moment Black Lives Matter 2020. How do I start? Let's start by making it clear that the reason, in my opinion, this this 2020 chapter of the Black Lives Matter movement was so big, it's first of all social media. And this social media is connected with where we were in time at that moment. It was after 2 months of being just online. We did everything online, literally everything. So everything you got from social media was part of your life. So that was one element. The three elements involved in that movement that started in May 2020 are, of course, George Floyd, the murder of George Floyd, but there was COVID, and also it was the president. So all these three elements combined led to something absolutely extraordinary, something that I feel so proud and honored that, and fortunate in a way, because it changed my life. It was human solidarity everywhere, every single place. But let's take things a little bit like back. What happened? On Monday, May 25th, when George Floyd was murdered in New York City, something happened in Central Park that day, that morning, which that specific 25th of May was a specific holiday, Memorial Day. So everybody was off, and because of COVID, everybody went to the park. Now, during that morning, that Monday, a white woman called the cops on a black man who was basically bird watching in the park. That went viral immediately, and that created a state of mind. I was in Central Park that day around noon or something like that, and I could not stay in the park. Everybody was angry. I did not even know what happened at that moment. So everybody was angry. There was this energy that something happened. So that happened the same day George Floyd was murdered. Now, from Monday until Friday, when the movement started here, things started coming to surface. First it was a shorter video, then a longer video, and then the full-on video. I think practically between Monday and Friday, we started boiling. At least I did start boiling. And on Saturday, when I got out of the house, so let's make things clear. The movement in New York started on May 29th in Brooklyn. There was a huge protest, huge. That means huge, with lots of arrests, with police NYPD running over people with their cars, a lot of violence. And that surfaced on social media on Saturday. On Saturday, when I joined the first protest of this movement, because I didn't go back since then. I don't know how to explain that to you, so I'm going to tell you the facts. I went out of the house to buy one bottle of water. The closest store is 5 minutes from my house. When I got out of the house, there was nothing. I mean, New York. I don't know how long can it take to buy a bottle of water, but facts are, when I came back, everything was Black Lives Matter. The whole city, and everything on all the streets around me was just loud, and people, and of course I left. I put the bottle and I went to the protest. So that's how big it started. It felt like everybody was outside, because it's true, everybody had the 2 months of quarantine to realize that racism produced a system that is not responsible for anything, not just discriminating people based on the color of their skin. They do not do their job anyway for anybody. So the moment, plus again, the president and the constant every day, at least 3 absolutely ridiculous things every day, every single day. So all that brought everybody out on the streets. Like, there were no streets where there were no protests, and they tried to break them. They chased us. You could not stop that. So that's the beginning of it in New York. Now I'm gonna try to be brief. There were some moments that I want to talk about, because they are important when we talk about Black Lives Matter. The first 3-4 days of protests, they were the most intense ever, and not just because everybody was on the street, but because you could not find a protest. You never knew where they were. So you had to follow either the choppers, the helicopters, because that's where the police was going, or to ask some people. those people were meeting in a specific place at Union Square. I used to call it the office. Now, after at least me, I discovered Justice for George NYC, which is an Instagram account that posts everything they have access to that happens in this movement since then. When I discovered Justice for George, everything changed because you knew exactly what's happening. You knew where the marches are, you knew where, and more important than that, you knew what marches and protests to support. Because when I said solidarity, it was also an idea of what can I do to help. I was asking for where is the protest, like I was asking where the protests are, I wasn't asking for like I was asking for what protests need more people, because I could have gone to any protest, like wherever I could see a chopper, I could go. But that was the idea. What can I do to help? And those were the first 3-4 days. And then Justice for George came into my life, and I presume in a lot of people's lives. And that made things easier in terms of knowing where to go. The next important moment is the curfew, which was completely unnecessary. And I think all of us broke the curfew because, you know, at some point it made no sense, because if the curfew is at 8 and I have to walk home, what's the point, you know? But anyway, those were very violent days. They were very dangerous days. Those were days that made us unite. All the groups that were formed already, or just, you know, protesters or organizers, that united us. That was one moment. After that, one very important thing about the curfew is that the day they stopped the curfew, the protest I was at ended at 8:00 p.m., like for real. Now, another moment that I think solidified the movement was the Black women's marches, because after George Floyd, immediately Breonna Taylor came into our knowledge and awareness. And the Breonna Taylor marches started, of course, in Brooklyn, but slowly, and that's when I came in with Black Women's March. And when I say I came in with, is that first I was aware of the march in Brooklyn. Then I was at a Black Women's March organized by Strategy for Black Lives. And then with Black Women's March and other, pretty much the Black women organizers in 4 or 5 groups in New York, we organized marches focused on Black women. And when I say Black women, I want you to understand that I mean all Black women. LGBTQIA+, everybody, old, young, it does not matter, Black women everywhere. After those marches, so there were 2 or 3 really big marches in New York, just organized by Black women and focused on Black women. The next important moment is City Hall, which was a specific type of protest focused on unhoused people and their faith, you know, focused on defunding the police. Actually, City Hall, it was to defund the police, but the action over there was focused on mutual aid mostly. And the next moment I'm going to mention is Stonewall Protests, which is a wonderful Black trans movement. Those were, some people call those protests church. And that protest was every Thursday until the end of last year. And the last moment of Black Lives Matter 2020 I'm going to mention, because it's important, was the election night. Because Black Women's March, along with all the other groups we worked before, we organized 2, not 1, 2 actions to celebrate the elections at Washington Square Park. And all the security, and it was COVID, so all the safety and security of the people, and there were a lot of people, we took care of that. The police was not there. So when maybe they would have been necessary, they were not there. We took care of that. So that's a package of what Black Lives Matter 2020, those are some moments that to me were important to create an image. Why they are important? Because I think what is different about Black Lives Matter 2020, let's call it, is the intersectionality. It's how it started in one point and then it opened up to all Black people. All Black people with all situations, everything that we are. And that being said, I'm gonna go back to Black Women's March. So Black Women's March, the idea came to me when I was walking from one march to another. And for, I think, 3 weeks already or 2 weeks already, I kept seeing all protests, all marches were led by Black women. And it's true. I said there was the Breonna Taylor march in Brooklyn, and Strategy for Black Lives, which is an organization from New York. They had a Black Women's March, and I was at that I was at that march. That was very inspiring. With all that in mind, walking, from one protest to another, I was looking on the street, and those days, beginning of June 2020. Everything in New York was Black Lives Matter. Coca-Cola was Black Lives Matter. Amazon was Black Lives Matter. Apple was Black. Everybody was Black Lives Matter, except Women's March. I didn't check for all the big names and things and stuff, but I know for sure that from May 30th until that day, I did not see a sign. I did not see anything on the streets saying Women's March supports Black Lives Matter or Black women or something. So with that in mind, I went to the protest. I asked one of the organizers, hey, do you know is there a Black Women's March? He said, no, why don't you do it? And I'm like, okay, because I was there to help. But the most important thing that man said was, why don't you do it? I'll help. And his group helped me every single time. That was very important. So with that in mind, what I did after I asked this question and I decided to start that, I asked all the Black women at the park if they think it's necessary, if they would come to a Black Women's March, I talked to them and I did not get any no. And then I started the process of starting the first Black Women's March. And I started working with Black women organizers from Brooklyn. I started working with Kimberly Bernard, who's the co-founder of Black Women's March. And she was in the group that I talked to, with that organizer. So we built the first Black Women's March. I'm going to mention one thing because it's important. When I was organizing this march, one of the Black women organizers asked me, hey, how do you see this march? How many people? And I said, literally, I would love to see the middle of Manhattan full of Black women, colorful and beautiful, chanting and dancing and, fighting, and that's what I said. And she laughed and I laughed too, because at that moment, organizing the first march, it was, a nice thought. At the first march, though, I was shocked by how many Black women were there, how many people were there. But more than that, at the end of the march, and we did that at all of our marches, we opened the mic. So we had, the organizer, we spoke at the beginning, but we opened the mic for other Black women to speak. It was fabulous. It was so overwhelming. It was beautiful to just hear and listen to all those stories that were like pretty much our stories, because that's the thing. We all have pretty much the same story. So that created a sort of energy that I think it has always been associated with Black Women's March. And after that, because that's why I mentioned that thing before about the number of women, the second Black Women's March was organized We're in collaboration with Strategy for Black Lives, Warriors in the Garden, Freedom March, NYC, and some Black women organizers, independent organizers, but all very good organizers. And it was in Times Square in July. I'm still getting chills. The whole Times Square was full. The whole city felt like it was just Black women out there. It was beautiful and it meant something. And at the end, we had like this open mic again, and it grew into something that is meaningful. It's something that is open, something that a place where you can talk freely and people are listening to you. So those were like, we did some marches, a lot, 2, 3, or 4 before we went to DC. We went to DC where we did our first drive over there, which was like, drive means when we collect donations. So we give them to shelters or to just, people in need. And we did the first one in DC, and it was overwhelming how much we got and how much love we got. And after DC, I think the most important moment in Black Women's March, I think, is the Black Women in History campaign that we started last year for Black History Month, and we continued it for International Women's Month or Women's Month. And so we did 2 campaigns. And this year for 2022, Black History Month, we did the 3rd Black Women in History campaign. And at the end of this campaign today, we're going to start the process of publishing a book. Also, on March 8th last year, on International Women's Day, we started a petition to introduce 57 Black women in public school curriculum, which this year, on March 8th, we're gonna adapt to the new research that we have done. Other than that, Black Women's March has done, besides marches and protests, we've done a lot of mutual aid. We worked with some other Black women organizers in Harlem, and we did some wonderful events for the community that involved that we did events for children, we did events for youth, again in collaboration with orgs from Harlem. And we also do a donation drive for Christmas that is now like tradition. Basically, we make a wish list for children in a shelter or someplace. We did a shelter, and the first year we did JCCA, which is foster care facility. And basically we ask the kids to write 3 wishes, and then we ask our donors to fulfill at least 1 wish for each kid. And to end this short presentation of Black Women's March, this year for International Women's Day, we have an event in collaboration with a studio in Manhattan, Alchemical Studio. And this event is for Black women, by Black women, with Black women, meaning that we're going to have a floor of the studio, and there are going to be rooms with artists, photographers, Black women artists, photographers. We have an abolition room that's going to be, with focused on education, and we have a Black feminist room, which is going to be the New York org called Black Feminist Matter. And at the end of the day, I'm gonna direct a staged reading of 9 Black women writers, so excerpts of text. It's gonna be, I have the other 5 actors, Black actors, beautiful Black, very talented Black actors. And the whole staged reading is gonna have 3 elements. It's gonna have projections, of course, the readings, and music. And all the writers and all the musicians, singers in our project are also in our Black Women in History campaign. That's it.
Yeah. So thank you, Caroline, for your. You were very quick. Don't worry. You have been very quick in your presentation. So thank you for staying in time. And just let me pick up 3 things that was touching me particularly. The first is what can I do for help? It's the point. What can I do for help? It's the main point. As you said, what can I do? It's a point of self-organization. It's a point of people helping other people. The other expression you used, quoting, is why don't you do it? Why don't you do it? When you were saying that there have been no Black women march up to that moment over this topic, and your answer was doing. And it's something that I think remind us that we are, as individuals, we are the main responsible for our doing or not doing. And that's very important for, especially for the students, I presume. And then the mutual aid, the community aid, again, something that is very interesting. It's very important, not just for the Black movement, the Black women movement, but for everybody all over the world, for all the people that are in condition of, how can I say, unfairness or unfair inequality. I have just, you were saying something that was interesting for us. I mean, putting together the George Floyd murder and Trump presidency and COVID. Things that were put under a spotlight, the unfairness of the system from many aspects. Because the 3 points, I mean, the unfairness of the system, I mean, the fact that for COVID, there were more people that were killed by COVID in the Black community, in the Brooklyn community, than in Manhattan, if you compare. And that the president, how the president was, how can I say, trying to make it normal some political discourse that was previously something that was of the radical right and not in the main system of the in the main world of the political system. And then the George Floyd killing, that it means how the cops are violent toward Black people. That is something that is very impressive if compared to the other. So I have a question in particular, but you were quoting. You were saying that the Black Women March and the Black Lives Matter movement is something that is comparable to the civil rights campaign in the 60s, if I understood what are you saying.
Yeah, we are
Yes.
are the continuation of the civil rights.
Yes, it's just a question. The question is, the civil rights movement was changing the conscience, the mentality of America in the 60s. The civil rights movement was producing constitutional changes and the acting of the government in favor or against, the racism, against the inequality, against the unfairness of the system, and was supported even by a lot of white people or Hispanics or what else. And how is the situation here in respect to Black Lives Matter movement? Is something that is just a Black people matter, or is something that is supported by the, how can I say, a big part of American society as a whole? It's just a question.
All right. So first of all, I want to make something clear because I think I forgot to mention that these 3 words, Black Lives Matter, they're terrible words because you have to reach a very, very low point to tell someone my life matters. And when I say matters, it's not matters a little bit or a little bit more. It either matters or it does not. So these 3 words are very painful words for Black people because it's basically asking another human being to take you as another human being. Now, Black Lives Matter in 2020, I repeat, until the elections, I think everything and everybody was Black Lives Matter. If you look even at the commercials, it was fascinating because I'm an actress, and I've been an actress in the city for a long time. It was fascinating how many commercials had Black people in them. I'm like, oh, that's the time. Everybody was Black Lives Matter for a minute. It was like insane to not be Black Lives Matter. Now, after the elections, it was a slow but sure downfall, meaning that at this moment right now, me personally, and I'm not going into some like really right or conservative circles, just, regular people. I already got the eye roll when I said something about Black Lives Matter. It's just too much again. It's just too much. And also something that bothers me, and specifically today for a reason, bothers me a lot, is this question, what can I do? I mean, you could ask that possibly because you're in Italy, but for someone who has been here, at least or specifically in New York for 2020, 2021, and the begin, even now, there are still protests. For you to ask what to do, if you have been at those protests in 2020 and even in 2021, that's all we talked about. Things that allies can do. You can't keep asking a Black person how to fix something that you created. You know what I'm saying? Like, racism is a white problem, is a Black consequence, but it's a problem that white people created, built it in a system, lived by it, and now they ask Black people what to do. We told you a million times. There are petitions, there are laws. The George Floyd law, it started in 2020. Everybody was like, of course. It's still in the Senate, it didn't move. The anti-lynching bill, it was started in 1919. It's 2022. It still didn't move anywhere. So yeah, you could do those things. You could just ask, because at some point, there's so much that Black people can do, organizers, activists, whatever, because we still Black. And we still don't have access, to have those complicated conversations with racist people who need to understand that it's 2020, 2022, And those conversations, white people in America could easily have them because they are their relatives most of the times, or people they know. So how is Black Lives Matter right now? I think there are a lot of politicians who support Black Lives Matter. I think there are a lot of celebrities, personalities that support Black Lives Matter. I'm talking now about Black people. About white people, I think there are some white people who really want to support, but somehow they miss the cues. They just do not. There is that point where something becomes uncomfortable, because as a white person in a Black movement, it's you have to imagine, it's a movement that is not about you. So that's a process that you need to take. And as any process, as it happens to all people, it's not easy. It's a change. But if you start crying and running away the first time is hard, what can I say? In order to help Black lives, you first need to learn Black lives and then to experience Black lives so you can understand what can you do. And the most important thing is to get out of this area of I'm not comfortable. Change and growth is not about comfort, it's exactly about discomfort. You don't grow out of comfort, you get bored.
I agree completely with you, Caroline. So we can open the floor to the question if
absolutely, please.
If the director,
I can't wait to hear what the students have to say.
Yes, right. You're right.
While we wait, I can tell you that
There are no
Black
questions.
women. Oh, there's a question.
There are
Yeah.
no
Okay. Okay.
questions up today, up to the moment. Sorry, there are no questions. They are writing to me, and so we can. I
I
think
think
that
I'm very clear.
is more white than clear. I presume, and no. So I think that we can have more room for listening to you and try. And I go on tell you something that I mean it's
I just, excuse me just
please
one
do
second,
it.
because I started to say something that was, and it is very important to the
Please do
conversation.
it.
Uh, in Minneapolis, we work with students. All the organizers, most of the organizers that we worked with, they're students.
Uh-huh.
I had an interview 2 weeks ago with a student. We work a lot with students because there is something about being a student.
Yeah,
You are in a community, you grow together, and it's important to be part of this movement. It's also important to support your own Black activists like Antonella Bundu. It would be, and if you ever have a conversation with her or a webinar with her, I would be so happy to listen to it, because I read her story. She's our Black woman today, a post today, and I read her story, and there's one thing that keeps following me. She was called the N-word in front of her daughter, and she sued that person and she won. On December 18th, I know for sure because I had an action the next day. On December 18th, in New York City, Midtown Manhattan, a Black woman was called the N-word and spat on by a man, a white man with mental issues. The important thing in that in the story is that when how I got this that this event was happening, I heard the N word yelled loud, like insane, in the middle of Manhattan. I'm like, what's happening? That man was restrained by the police, but they did not make him stop call that name. They went to the Black woman and asked her 2 or 3 times if she's sure that's what happened. Under the circumstances that she was with 2 children, the oldest was 9, and the boy, because the boy chased the man who spat on his mother, not the police, and a little girl who was like 5, 6, something like that. So in front of your children, you are spat on. Your son chases the man who did that. You are called the N word in front of the police. And nothing. You can't go to court and sue someone here because they called you the N-word. No way. I haven't heard of it. Let me know if somebody from America listens or watches. Please let me know. But that doesn't happen here. And I remember in our private conversation, 2 weeks ago when we were discussing this, that I mentioned something that is very important to understand for Europeans and everybody else in the world. In America, racism is in the system. Specifically, if, let's say in the 40s, during Jim Crow, you could not rent an apartment to Black people because you couldn't. Right now, there's still no Black people in that building. It's just for different reasons. It's, credit score or income or something, that's the reality.
that's the point. I mean, it's difficult for us, the white people, to
How is that difficult for white
let,
people?
let
Seriously.
me end the sentence.
Go ahead, please.
It's difficult to imagine your experience. I was just supporting what you were saying because we never experienced a system in which we were receiving an unfair treatment for being white. So this is the difficult to imagine for us that it was trying. Let me just end the sentence. Let me
I'm
just end.
breathing.
Yes, I mean, it's just I can understand, and I the only thing I can tell you is that for me, a white middle-aged man in Europe, so I'm not black, I'm not woman, but what can I say is that for me, for my values, for my tradition, until the weakest is not protected by the law and by the police officer, my personal freedom is under threat. So I think that the best way for us to share what we're saying is that you cannot choose in an ideal world where you will be. So it's important that to protect the weakest, because the protection of the weakest is the best shield for everybody, not just for the weakest, not just for the black women, but for everybody. So I think that this is something that everybody can understand, because the principle of freedom and democracy, and it's a pity that people cannot understand that. Please.
I want to I want to make this mention and also go back to Black women for a second. The idea that Black women, Black people are weak is something that the society educated us that we are. Everything you find in let's say school books about Black women are some wonderful Black women that went through hell. And the perspective you are taught about those Black women is one that is, yes, weak. Yes, the victim, because we were. But I think that the real perspective of Black women is in this Black Women in History campaign, or in others that I'm sure are there, which perspective is Black women are stronger than you would think in spite of. And please let me finish. No matter how strong you become or are born or you invent yourself into, the system is always one step ahead. So I don't think that this is the mention I wanted to make, because I understand what you meant by weak. I understand that it's just where we are in, as a position of force, if you want. I get it. It's not, I'm not taking your words. I wanted to make this mention because that's what I'm personally fighting for with this Black Women in History campaign. This perspective of Black women that basically brings our life experience to the bottom of the barrel. And that's A, not accurate. B, it's something that should bother you. It's like Black women have to face, race, sexism, and Black trans women have to face sexism, racism, and every other aspect of their transformation. That's a ridiculous battle. It's ridiculous to even imagine what the life of a Black trans woman is. I was at some Black trans women marches. The stories I heard shook me forever, but the thing that follows me every day is we finished the march and we were leaving, and one Black trans woman who doesn't look weak at all looked at me and told me, life expectancy for me as a Black trans woman is 30 years old. Life expectancy, because Black trans women are killed every single day. Every single day. And not by the police, just by the police. By human beings that refuse to evolve.
Yes, right. I completely agree with you. But we have a question from a student That is, do you think the Biden administration is making Black people more heard in America, or do you think the problem is more structural and deep? So how the Biden administration is eventually changing the situation?
As far as I can tell by now, what happens, but I think that would have happened anyway because of the movement, Black issues, yeah, they are more, in the conversation. But that didn't bring any solutions, any real solution, except the nomination for the Supreme Court, which was one of the promises from the campaign. There are these laws that would change a lot in America, and I keep asking myself, why isn't racism illegal? But anyway, in terms of what Biden is doing by now, I think he's trying to fulfill his promises and ducking any other attempt of addressing other issues that were not his promises, were things he stood by, because everybody did that then. That's how I see things.
Okay. Just a question, one more question. Bernie Sanders was supported by a lot of part of progressive America. And at the end of the day, one of the things that was on the media was that Bernie Sanders was not so, how can I say, were not felt so close to the issue of Black people. Is it true that Black people didn't feel Bernie Sanders so sensitive, so dedicated to this kind of issue, or was a misrepresentation of part of the media, if the question is clear?
I think it's very hard for Black people to fully support a white representative. It's a history of being, lied to, taken advantage of, promises that were not kept. In terms of Bernie Sanders, I think as a politician in 2020, in 2016, in this century, if you do not, in America especially, if you do not focus on the Black situation, you're not seeing the full picture. And I think if you do not make a point of saying, hey, I'm going to do this and this and this and that, I think Black people automatically don't even listen, because it's so bad. Again, the movement is called Black Lives Matter. That's the bottom of the barrel. We're fighting to be alive. So I think that's my view, and I'm not a very political person. Everything I do, I focus on, social issues, because I literally can't with politicians.
Yeah. And so if I dare about the former First Lady, Mrs. Obama, Michelle Obama, there are lots of people supporting the idea that Michelle Obama could be the next candidate for Democrats. What do you think about it? Because it's relevant for us to understand.
I would love to.
She's Black, she's a woman, so I mean.
It's not just that. Of course, she's Black and she's a woman, but it's not just that. Michelle Obama has the hope, she already done some things that changed something drastically. And thank you for the question. I am also a teacher. I'm teaching acting in public schools in not in Manhattan, in Brooklyn, Queens, whatever. What Michelle Obama changed with that breakfast, with that healthy food, with everything she did not just change when she was there. Kids are still eating apples, in the public schools because Michelle Obama. She created a sort of real hope because she specifically did some things, and I'm sure if you follow her, you know she's still doing things. But also, she was in that position, that high, as a Black woman. She knows that whole Obama 8 years from the perspective of a Black woman. And I think it's the moment in history that we focus attention on Black women, because you know, it's ridiculous to look at what happens and have the numbers. We have the first judge at the Supreme Court. There's still like one Black woman for everything. And this, I have to mention that if you go in any office, not business, but you know, institutions, you'll see how many Black women work there, how many Black women built everything you see now. Feminism was created with Black women, even though I kind of have this theory that I'm working on that it was created by Black women, but let's call it as it is right now. In America, the women's movement started with Black women and white women. And when we got to the moment, let's vote, it was just white women because, you know, life. And I think it's time, and I think Michelle Obama embodies all that, you know, all the struggle, the success, and also what you do when you have the success. Do you still care about the community? Yes, you do. Do you have initiatives that are actually, you know, strong enough to resist the time? Yes, she had. So yeah, for me, it would be amazing from my perspective.
Okay, thank you very much, Caroline. Sorry for so many questions in politics, but it's something that is very studying politics is my job at the end of the day, so I'm very curious about that. And I think that we are more or less at the end of the conversation. Please, if there is any other question, let me know. Let know to Caroline, especially right now, because we are at the end of our hour, more or less. Please, Caroline, please.
I would like to add something because it's very important, because it happened
Yes,
yesterday. So since yesterday, I personally decided, and I'm sure many other people decided the same, racism is the most awful thing in the world. Because you know what? George Floyd was killed in the middle of a pandemic, at the height of it. Yesterday, during a war, at the border of Ukraine, Poland, Bulgaria, Romania, they still refused Black refugees from Ukraine. I'm getting angry when I'm talking about it. This is ridiculous. And yeah, I think it's important. The most news I have, like the most videos I saw are from Poland, but both of the other countries are mentioned. So you gotta start thinking really seriously of addressing racism in Europe. You gotta please pay attention to your own activists in Italy, Antonella Bundu, in France, in Germany, in England. There is a Black Lives Matter movement in Europe too. And when the movement happened in America, it happened in Europe too. And we love you for that. My point being that I want to say that we see all the Black women and Black, you know, activists around the world. And we love everybody who's doing any type of work. It's time for you, the rest of the people, to support them, to look for them, to, you know, promote them, and pay attention to what racism is in your own country, because we can build together.
I agree with the point that racism is one of the basic problem in our societies, and of course we are very happy for how the Polish are receiving people from Ukraine, but we have to remember that they were doing the opposite toward 5,000 people coming from Syria for weeks during the winter, not allowing them to enter the Europe. So
exactly.
Yeah.
Sorry, because I'm sorry. I think I didn't give the full information. It's not just Black people yesterday. It's Black people, Arab people, and Indian
Yes.
people. I'm sorry, because it wasn't,
No.
but it's still racism.
Of course.
You know.
Caroline, I think that our time in this in this meeting is over. Of course, I hope that our time will become going on and on. And thank you for being here. Thank you for sharing your experience. Thank you for sharing your feeling and all the things that we are talking about are really relevant for us, for making us better, and not just for supporting everybody. Thank you so much, Caroline. Thank you to the students. Thank you to the
And I want to thank everybody. I want to thank everybody. I want to thank you again for the invitation, for the chance to speak to people outside of America. I want to thank you for how we organized everything together. And thank you to all the students who watched. Please follow Black Women's March on Instagram. Follow me on Instagram. But also, when you follow me, make sure you follow other Black orgs. All right?
Right, it's right. Thank you very much, Caroline. And thank you to the director. Ciao, Caroline. Thank you for coming. Really.
Bye. Thank you.